Good evening, everybody. So happy to have you here, and thank you all for joining us tonight for this discussion that is going to be real and raw, and it's a discussion on race. We have an incredible group of panelists here, and we are so excited, and we know you will be too, to hear from them. But first, I want to give you just a little bit of background. I founded the Black Institute in 2010. We have three strategies: knowledge, leadership, community. We call it a head, heart, and feet strategy. Knowledge is the head, and we do research, data. Leadership is the heart, and we do that through policy and legislation and training. And community, of course, is always the feet, through grassroots organizing. Now, we say that we are an action tank, and that means a think tank that takes action. We have 4 issues: environment, education, economics, and immigration. But tonight, we are introducing our second volume of All Races, All Faces. This is our second volume of A Guide to Immigrant New York, and we're launching the book tonight, but we're also launching this series of conversation of real, raw discussions on race. So we have a lot of work to do. So tonight I want to introduce you to our panelists, and as we start this discussion of race, it is for us, by us, among us. So let me introduce our first panelist in this round table, Professor Christina Greer. Christina Greer is a political science professor, associate professor at Fordham University here in New York. She is the author of Black Ethnics. She's the co-host of FAQ NYC. She's also the politics editor of the Greer, host of the Aftermath on OZ.com, and she is a frequent political commentator and analyst on MSNBC. Christina Greer, ladies and gentlemen. Our next panelist is Dimple Wallabus. Now, Dimple is the founder and CEO of Rhythm Nation Entertainment, and she's also the founder of Stalwarts Youth Foundation. She spent nearly 25 years, I know she doesn't look it, but she spent 25 years in the media, marketing, and entertainment industries. She has been providing her political expertise to a wide range of organizations and brands. She is committed to engagement and civic participation, and she serves on the MWBE, that is Minority and Women Business Entrepreneurs Committee of the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce and the Mayor's Task Force on Education. Dimple Wallabus. Next, I don't know how much I can say about this man, A.R. Bernard. He is the senior pastor of the Christian Cultural Center. Now, if for those of you who don't know, this is a mega church. Back in the day, before there were a lot of mega churches in Brooklyn. Pastor Bernard founded the Christian Community Relations Council, the CCRC. This is a New York-based nonprofit that serves as a central resource and coordinating body for congregations and community organizations that can work together. He's currently on the board of directors for the Commission of Religious Leaders. He served on the New York City Economic Development Corporation Board. He is also the founder of the Cultural Arts Academy Charter School. He is an author, a developer, and an international leading political thought maker. Reverend Pastor A.R. Bernard. Next is our troublemaker on this panel, Dr. Keith White. He is the founder of Free Integrated Housing and Keith White, LLC. Now, the doctor, as we call him, began his career as an educator at Boys and Girls High School. But this was while he was attending law school. He was teaching school. And then from there, he went on to be a prosecutor in the Kings County District Attorney's Office. Since then, he's worked as an independent counsel for Pastor Bernard. He's worked with the New York City Housing Authority, HBD, Housing Preservation and Development. He's worked with HUD, and he's worked to develop and build affordable housing for thousands of disadvantaged members of the Brooklyn and New York City community. Keith White is a founding board member of the Brooklyn Combine. Now that's a grassroots nonprofit organization that partners with schools and underserved communities throughout the world to provide coding, life skills, mentoring, and restorative justice programming. Ladies and gentlemen, the violent Dr. Keith White. Our next panelist is Carl Ahmed Lipscomb. Now, Carl is a policy and legal advocate. He's a researcher and a senior organizer. He's formerly worked with the Bronx Defenders, on Arnold Adventures, and the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, BAJI. We all know them. Now, he's outside of BCBF. Carl performs and serves as a board member of After Work Theater and is on the LGBTQ Rights Committee of the New York City Bar Association. Carl Ahmed Lipscomb. And finally, you know, it seems like we're going to have a lot of God up in here tonight. Reverend Pastor Samuel Nicholas. Now, Pastor Sam is the senior pastor of Evangelical Crusade of Fishers of Men. He spent 25 years in numerous civic roles, including serving with the New York Department of Youth and Community Development and constituent services with the New York City Controller's Office. And Pastor Nicholas is the pastor of the largest Haitian church in the entire New York region. Pastor Sam Nicholas. And so, everybody, let's get this party started here. This will be a free-ranging discussion that will be real and raw on race. So, since it's about race, let's talk about it. Now, the first question, and I'm going to call on Professor Greer first, because she got on her red glasses tonight, and that means her conversation is going to be hot. The first topic is about colorism and classism. Now, we've all heard of the brown bag test and the phrase light, bright, damn near white. Some people are referred to as red bone, and that ubiquitous, if you're black, get back, but if you're brown, you can stick around. So the question to our roundtable tonight is, where do these phrases come from? When did they come? Why are they so pervasive when we talk among each other in the Black community? And what is it about skin color, colorism? Professor.
Thanks, Bertha, for having me. And it's great to be here with all of you tonight. I mean, Bertha, I think this conversation always has to happen in the shadow of white supremacy. You know, in this country and across the globe, so many countries have been colonized and abused. And sadly, it's not just the physical oppression that has occurred, but there is some sort of ideology that is seeped into certain mindsets where the closer to whiteness you are, the better it is. Almost like the white man's ice is colder. I mean, but we know that historically, at least in this country, so many people were able to actually have opportunities if they were lighter skinned. We know this during the times of U.S. chattel slavery, but also when people entered the workforce. with corporations preferring lighter skinned people to darker skinned people. And sadly, that mindset has seeped into various facets of our community. And we've taken on some of that, not just bad behavior, but that ill-informed type of thought process when it comes to dealing with one another. We know that, certain sororities and fraternities are known to have lighter or darker members. But I think that, instead of just putting the conversation on us, which is where it needs to happen, we have to understand that we're undoing or trying to undo centuries of a dominant structure that has told Black people that they were not good as them. They were less than. And the closer you were to whiteness, the better off you were and the better off you would be. So I think we always have to remember that the baseline structure is white supremacy and anti-Black racism when it comes to these conversations. And we're the ones who have to fight through it to make sure that we don't pass this down to our children, male and female, when we're thinking about hair texture and features, whether it's noses or colors of eyes or whatever it may be. The shadow of white supremacy is there, and that's what we're really talking about.
But when we talk about this, we've been here since 1619. Some of us have gotten here a little later. But even though this is hurtful, among us, we still do it. This is the 21st century. So again, I'm going to ask this question of you, Carl. I mean, what is it about color? We see, in terms of class, we see Black people, once they get rich, they really perpetuate miscegenation. This is in dating, this is in business. And so here we are in the 21st century. And so as Christina said, we're the ones that have to cure this. So how do we do that? And how does that color thing get in to be mixed up with class? You should unmute yourself, Carl. There you go.
Oh, I make these comments as I've surrounded myself with lighting because I'm darker, and so I'm in a well-lit room here. But I think this goes back to what Christina alluded to. We, since 1619, since the first of us arrived here, we've been trying to fit into this structure of white supremacy. And this structure of white supremacy has in many ways forced us to enforce colorism upon ourselves. It's almost like we can look at a paint palette, and the darker you are, the more likely you are to be criminalized, both by the formal criminal legal system, but by society as a whole. People that are darker skinned are less likely to be employed, to get employment. People that are darker skinned are more likely to be detained and deported by ICE, more likely to live below the poverty line. And so in many ways, this is a system that is forced upon us. And one thing we know about our people is that we're survivors. We're going to build structures. We're going to figure out how to survive in this land. Fortunately for us, we're at a time where we can begin to break down this structure. We've finally gotten to the point where we have just enough power to mobilize and to start to fight back against white supremacy. And I really think that, when we say it's on us, we have to break this down in our communities. It's on us, but it's also on us to fight white supremacy. That's what we're really fighting against here.
Well, see, in this conversation, and, Keith, you're a troublemaker. And, my concern is I'm really not concerned about white people. White people gonna do what white people do. And white people have been doing it for 400 years. What I'm concerned about is what we do and what we do to each other and how we do each other. This is what I'm concerned about when we talk about colorism and classism. we have, it seems like most of the bougie Negroes are lighter than the darker Negroes. So that's what I'm saying. I want to talk about how we're dealing with each other internally within the family, Keith.
Right. So I think that I would just like to take a step back and say that I believe that humanity has always sought ways to find comfort, and that comfort has often come through division. So if I can separate or distinguish myself or my group from that group, I can find comfort in being better than them. And I think that humanity has done that for a very long time in recorded history. And so if we look at it under the and within the framework of white supremacy, which is the word of the day, right? Which is informed by capitalism because that's driving it. I think that if you look at what I don't think that it's necessarily white people. I think it's whiteness. I think that whiteness is really the issue because that's the construct that's empowering some and disenfranchising others. And I think that if we look at whiteness as a construct as the problem, as the ideology that the ideology of comfort and being above someone else, then we can then identify, I think to Dr. Greer's point, like groups that or ideas around white adjacency. And so if we can say, you know what, let's completely look at this value system of whiteness as a construct, break it down for what it is, and then approach it instead of it being a value system, but approach it understanding that it's a belief that some people subscribe to. Then we can start to have honest conversations within our own community about why we want to create these distinctions, or why does humanity want to create these distinctions? Why do white people who subscribe to whiteness, this concept of whiteness, why do they subscribe to this concept of whiteness? Because it creates privilege, it creates power, and what it does for them, it does the opposite for us. And I think that if once we start having those conversations, then we start looking at whiteness as a value system that has no value, and we start looking at whiteness as problem, whiteness as the problem.
So Dimple, you've been in the media, and correct me if I'm wrong, but colorism, to me, being on the outside, seems to be rampant throughout the media and entertainment. Is that true even today?
Well, what I'll definitely say that I was the first person to have a live television program back in Guyana, in South America, where I'm from. And the program was the first hip hop and R&B program. And the way women were sexualized back in the 90s in terms of hip hop and R&B music, other genres too, but for Rhythm Nation, that's what the focus was on. In Guyana, most of our Black teens were gravitating towards the music because of the energy and because of the messages. But moreover, coming here to America, in terms of hip hop and R&B music, some of the stuff we see and some of the stuff that are in the videos are not necessarily reality. Because as a person who owns a production company, some of those necklaces are not real. They're not gold. And some of the cars the rappers drive are in a video and not their cars. But a lot of the kids don't know this. This is just a fake reality. So in terms of sometimes what we see in the media, moreover, social media perpetuates a certain kind of image that is not necessarily reality. So some of our youth gravitate towards what necessarily could be like a negative energy of what reality is, but in actuality, that's not what it is. Those guys are actually just aspiring to get to the greatness of maybe like a Jay-Z. But, you know, those are just young people who just has aspirations, or have aspirations of doing great things. But again, social media and media as a whole perpetuate a certain image that we all want to aspire to, which is associated with some kind of, as Dr. White said, some kind of association, some kind of group, like-mindedness of wealth.
It seems as though you emulate what you know. And, to end this question, I'm going to call on both of my pastors, see if we could get some Black Jesus up in here. So, Pastor Bernard, colorism, that question, to you. I mean, my God.
Well, well, Bertha, you're talking and you're asking an Afro-Latino who grew up in America, too light to be Black and too dark to be white. That was my dilemma, and of course, I identified with Blackness. Unfortunately, throughout history, we have had people who believe that their freedom, their independence is based upon or dependent upon the domination of others. But in the same vein that this conversation began with, I think 600 years of imperialism, where the myth of white superiority, the myth of Black inferiority was necessary to perpetuate oppression upon a labor force. And along the way, we ourselves got caught up in it and began to buy into those myths. And unfortunately, it's been difficult to shake. And we know that, discrimination based on skin color, is evidence around the world. And it shows up in criminal justice, business, the economy, housing, healthcare, media, and politics. And unfortunately, our people have gotten caught up in that myth. And it's difficult to shed, especially within a system, American system especially, that continues to reinforce that myth.
Well, I'm putting the same question to Pastor Nicholas, but I'm going to go in to another. This is going to lead into another. We know about color. But here's the thing, Pastor Nicholas. Why and this is for all of you, this is what I want to know, because again, we're in the kitchen, we're just talking amongst ourselves here. Why is it that when immigrants get here, the first people that they look down on are African Americans? Why is there a separation? Let's talk about that. Since we're talking about colorism, let's talk about how immigrants feel about the perception of Blackness versus the reality.
So my introduction to the United States, I'm not sure if you can hear me. If I'm live, you can hear me now, right? Everybody can hear me. My introduction to the United States and to racism, United States, I came to the United States in 1968. 1968, we were one, maybe 200 to 300 at a maximum of people that spoke Creole and French. So we were always perceived on the other side. So my introduction to racism, on my first day that I arrived in this country, I looked like the African Americans. I looked like the West Indian. I looked like the person from Guyana. I looked like the person from Trinidad. But whenever I opened my mouth, I could not speak English. I did not speak English. So I was called Frenchie. So that was the expression. This is what we were introduced to. So we had to run from school, run from everybody, and that was our introduction to racism. Our introduction to racism wasn't racism versus the white person, but my introduction to racism was that culturally I spoke a different language. I might have looked like everybody else, but living in Crown Heights, I sounded like a different person. So that was my introduction. So, and the country that I came from, at that juncture, I did not understand what it meant to be a Black person. We did not see the colonizer. We did not see the white person. We saw all ourselves as African American, as Caribbean folks. But when I came here, instead of fighting against what we fought against in 1804, I had to fight to survive against my brothers and my sisters that spoke a different language than myself.
So this is
So
open
that's
mic.
my-
Everybody's mic is open, and we want to talk to each other. So let me ask you about Jeff, because I know that's hurtful.
So Bertha, I mean,
Go ahead, Professor.
Bertha, I was gonna say, you know, I talk about this in my book because Black Americans, by many across the globe, are perceived to be in last place if we think about racial hierarchies. And so just because people don't live in the United States, they still read the news and they have television. And so they understand race and racism well before they get here. So this idea that I interviewed lots of folks and did a survey for the book, but this is the first time we see African and Afro-Caribbean immigrants almost, you know, remaining immigrant in some ways, because to become American as a Black person, as a Black immigrant, is to become Black American. And some people aren't excited about that prospect. You know, this idea that we have residential segregation, so oftentimes Black immigrants find themselves living among Black Americans. So as Carl mentioned, you know, they're susceptible to interactions with the police that other non-Black immigrants don't have. They experience discrimination that Black Americans live with on a daily basis. And so this idea of Blackness in this country is very real. So there are many immigrants who actually don't want any part of that. They want to make sure that their kids don't get caught up with the Black kids, whether it's in a public school or an Ivy League institution when they go to college. So unfortunately, there's some misperceptions and misconceptions about I put the groups in sort of three buckets: Africa and the 54 countries, the various countries in the Caribbean, and Black Americans. But we know that there's great diversity, not just linguistic diversity, as the pastor alluded to, but, you know, people come here as refugees, as voluntary immigrants, as people who are here for university, others who were once wealthy and are no longer wealthy now that they're in the States. So there's a myriad of ways that we're supposed to interact. We also have to remember that there's this thing called immigrant selection. So, you know, when we're looking at Black Americans, that's the whole orchard. It's A through Z. It's everybody. With immigrants, it's a select group if you have the social, political, and financial networks to make it happen. So we're actually not dealing with apples to apples. We're dealing with an orchard versus a bushel. And so when we have to keep in mind, I know you don't really care about what white people think, but it's like the white nationalist, white supremacist power structure has embedded all of our nations, whether you're native born Black in your 15th generation, or you're from a colonized country in the Caribbean or a colonized country on the continent. So these ideas are still floating around in our histories. So when we interact, there is this sense of competition. There is this sense of scarce resources, even though it's only a perception of scarce resources, because we know this country has all the resources in the world if they want them. So we have to kind of get over this idea that we're in competition and figure out the best ways that we should be building coalitions. That's very difficult when on a daily basis in education and housing and employment, we're told that one group is smarter than the other or works harder than the other. We've got colorism going on and other different sort of potential pitfalls that could pull us apart.
Bertha, if I may, this is a bit anecdotal, but I was asked to speak at one of the largest Nigerian churches in the country in Washington, D.C. And during my presentation, I referred to myself as African American, as part of that that African diaspora to the Americas. And after the service, I had lunch with the Nigerian pastor, and he was puzzled. And he asked me, he said, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. He said, during your presentation, you referred to yourself as African American. I said, that's correct. He said, but you're not African American. So we went into a conversation. I said, okay, then I'm not African American, and I fought all my life to be African American in this country. I said, then why am I not African American? He said, because of your articulation, your mannerism, your intellect, the way you carry yourself, the way you speak. And he went through this list of characteristics that made me non-African American. So I said, then what am I? He said, can I be honest with you? I said, sure. He said, you're white. I said, I'm white. I said, why am I white? And he went through the list of characteristics of intelligence, etc. And he bought into, as a Nigerian, this image of African Americans as, like the doctor said, on the low rung on the totem pole. That when it comes to the hierarchy of Black people, African Americans are low. And this is something that is a perception that has been spread around the world, and that Black immigrants come to the United States and have that perception of African Americans.
If I may piggyback off of Dr. Bernard, that perception is what I would say subliminal interjection. We watch TV commercials, we read billboards, everything that we see around us. A doll for kids are usually white. I mean, now it's changed. But children, regardless of they're Black or brown, they walk around with a white doll in their hand. These are perceptions of what is beauty. When we look at a television commercial, you see white women. You look at the billboard, white women wearing the jeans that you have to wear. Some of us are shaped differently, so the jeans would not fit the same way, of course. So these are some of the things that have been injected in our heads, over a period of time. So these are some of the things when you see a TV commercial now and there's a Black couple, these are changes now that we see. A Cheerios box may have a kid that is Black, or a diaper box with a kid that's Black. It's something a little more relatable. But in the past, those things were not the case. So sometimes what we see is what we're accustomed to seeing, accustomed to putting it in our heads, because it's been injected subliminally into our minds with everything we see around us, what is white, 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 white. Now it's changing a little bit because there are business owners who want to see changes, and people are demanding changes. And these are some of the things that we really have to do, is to demand change. And not only demand it in terms of saying it, we're working together to do it as business owners and as a community.
And I just,
if I may.
Oh, is my mic on? Or no. All right, I was just going to jump in. I've worked on this exact issue for the better part of a decade. I'm at Brooklyn Community Bail Fund. We've worked on this for the last 6 years. The parallels between the issues facing Black immigrants and African Americans are both very, very apparent for those that look at the system from a macro level, but they're hidden by policymakers. They're hidden in the media. We don't hear that Black immigrants are more likely to get detained and deported than every other immigrant group. We don't hear that Black immigrants are less likely to have legal representation in immigration proceedings, which is very similar to the numbers that we know that all Black communities face when it comes to the criminal legal system. And I personally place a lot of the blame for this on the immigrant rights movement. And I know this might be a little controversial, but I think that for so long, we all hear this narrative, the good versus bad immigrant. But I think for so long, the immigrant rights movement has pushed this idea that there are immigrants that belong because they want to be the valedictorian, or they want to start businesses, or they want to quote unquote integrate into society. And for many African Americans, when they hear those, they think of the dog whistles that have been perpetuated against their communities. Black African Americans are stereotyped as being uneducated and not wanting to graduate from high school. They're stereotyped as being lazy and unemployable, not the type of person that's worthy of getting a business loan and starting a business. And so when African Americans hear those narratives, they think of immigrants, and many African Americans are threatened because one, they think these Black immigrants are here to take the little that I have, but also this immigrant rights movement isn't for me. This is inevitably a movement that's working against my interests. And then the other thing, when we hear immigrant rights activists, when we hear immigrants talk about immigrant organizations talk about this idea of integration, that's, I draw the parallel with assimilation. They're integrating as I think Christina said earlier, into white America, not Black America. They want, there's this idea that citizenship is some sort of magic bullet that's going to fix everything. But for African Americans, supposedly we gained citizenship after the Civil War, but we've been fighting to really actualize the rights that we have as citizens ever since. And so, obviously I have a lot to say about this, but, I think that a lot of the blame is on our communities, but, this is pushed along by policymakers. It's pushed along by well-intentioned but uninformed movements as well.
I think that one of the challenges too is, or something that I keep hearing is, are these things that qualify people to be here. And so whether it's a conversation about immigration, whether it's a conversation about colorism and racism within our own communities, right? There keeps being this theme about something qualifying somebody to be accepted into a space. And I think that the immigration conversation in America is even skewed, I think, to Carl's point, by the idea of what it even takes to be a citizen in America. When you apply for citizenship in America, you take a test where you have to know who the first president was. You have to, like, these questions that mean nothing, that absolutely show no commitment to integrity, to character, to values that are in alignment with democracy. And so I think that the conversation feels a little bit circular, and especially because there are these qualifiers, and I don't, skin color being one of them.
Well, that brings me into our next question, because when we were talking about immigrants, and I read Dr. Greer's book, and I've also read, there are folks, Afro-Latinos in the Dominican Republic, for instance, that are darker than anybody here, and will say, to Reverend Bernard's point, that they are white. But if people are obsessed about white, right now, I think in this moment, folks are very obsessed about Black authenticity. Like, who is blackity black? Who is black enough? What is Black authenticity? I mean, what the hell is Blackness anyway? What the hell is Black authenticity? And again, this is open mic, so jump in and talk about it, because people came up to me a lot 10 years ago and said, why are you naming it the Black Institute? I said, yeah, because I'm blackity black and I want there to be no mistake about it. But right now, folks get canceled because they're not authentically Black, or they're not Afro-centric enough. So what does that mean to be authentically Black? Oh, don't nobody want to talk about something.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I think it's a hard question, because I don't subscribe to those conversations, as someone who was Black and grew up in white spaces, and I lived in different parts of the country. And so I never played the sort of Black litmus test, whatever that may be. I think Black is a personal identity for folks.
Wait,
to me, for my definition is, do I feel? Yeah, for some people. There's some people who are phenotypically Black, but they do not support Black people. They don't feel community and fellowship with Black people. They are skin folk and not kinfolk at all, right? They don't feel any need to uplift other Black people. We saw it during this election season. So I'm not going to say they're not Black. That's just their idea of Blackness, which is the antithesis of mine. So, I mean, as someone who's grown up in white spaces, I'm always a little reticent of kind of like the Black litmus test, just because depending on where you live, for some people, it took them a long time to understand Blackness because they didn't grow up with Black people. Okay. For others, they had parents who made them ashamed to be Black, and it took them a while to figure out that that wasn't okay. We know that some immigrant parents make sure that their kids stay away from Black Americans because they see them as less than. And similarly, Black American parents might keep their kids away from immigrants because they have various stereotypes. So I think when we view our identity in a diasporic sense, And that's how I like to view it. But that's just how I like to view it. But we have to understand that it's historic. I think it's somewhat regionally specific sometimes. And I think it does depend on people's experiences, how they choose to define themselves. Because keep in mind, Bertha, if you and I were the only two Black people in, a community of all whites, we would be Black, right? Or if Dimple and I were in a community of all white people, the two of us would probably be the Black girls. But if we're in a much more diverse community, Dimple might be Guyanese, I'm Black American. Every now and again, I give a shout out to the Bahamians, right? And so it's like, it depends on the context for a lot of folks. But I don't have like a measurement stick. I just view it as, do you try and uplift Black people in a diasporic sense? And I move on from there.
I think the challenge with defining Blackness, especially in this context, is that historically we've defined Blackness in its relation to whiteness, and so I think that if we draw it back a little bit and simply try to define Blackness, I think that it is defined as the spectrum of diasporic people who are across the globe. Though I don't think that Blackness is limited to African Americans. I don't think that it's an American specific thing at this point. I think that African people globally have been minoritized in a way that's not honest. And so Blackness to me, and again, I believe that it is a subjective thing to a certain degree, but Blackness to me is the diasporic experience, the people that come from the diaspora.
So Dr. White, are you saying that I could lose my Black card, that it's not my color of my skin, if I don't act a certain way or think a certain way?
We missed the beginning.
I said, so does that mean that if I don't conduct myself in a certain way approved by Blackness, I could lose my Black card?
Well, I think
then Blackness is no longer a race, is it? Or skin color?
Well, that's the challenge, right? Is the idea that Blackness is one thing. And this is anecdotal quickly. I was watching, and no one get mad at me for this. I was watching Different Strokes this morning, and there was an episode of Different Strokes where where Willis has some friends over from his old neighborhood in Harlem, and the friends come over. One's wearing a dashiki, and the other one has on shades. They're really cool guys, and they start talking to Willis, and they say, Willis, you really you digging this Park Avenue lifestyle, man. You too white for us. You can't hang out with us. And the rest of the episode, it's Mr. Drummond trying to convince Willis that he is Black enough. And the episode was incredibly problematic, right? And I won't get into the rest of it, but I think that the idea that there is one way to act, one way to be, one way to dress is that I think that's limiting, and I think that's been the problem with Blackness in America specifically. This idea that we can't be multi-layered, complex human beings that experience life just like the rest of the world.
I just want to add
here's the other thing which is going to lead us into our final topic, which Dimple and Pastor Sam, it's just entitled Black Politics. Okay, what was it about this last election that brought out so many Black voters? What is the so-called Black agenda? Everybody's telling us we got to have a Black agenda. And, what is this agenda? And who is going to set this agenda? And to me, all of this comes into play. Colorism, the appropriation of Blackness, okay? What's that child's name? Donegal or whatever, just declare herself to be black. But I think the political moment, and especially, now that black female voters have become the thing, like we wasn't there before redeeming this party every year. So politically, what is the black agenda and who's going to say it?
So can I just jump in a little bit, because I just wanted to just I want to go back a little bit. I just want to affirm a couple of things that Dr. Greer said. Stay away from African Americans. Just to segue back a little bit, that's one of the things that we were taught to do as immigrants. I was growing up, but then we had to learn how to develop our own relationship with African Americans and everybody else that came from culturally. And one of the keys that they always utilized to divide us was just to tell us that, oh, you are articulate, or you spoke differently than the other person. So going into the politics, as a pastor, this past election and the Democratic Party, I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I have issues dividing what the Bible says and what my congregation needs are versus the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. I do not agree with everything that the Democratic Party does. I do not agree with everything that the Republican Party does. But there is no way, as a person of faith, that I could stand by and watch us be divided so much more, no matter how I felt about the Democratic Party, no matter how I felt about the Republican Party. But the person, the occupier in charge of the White House, for me personally and my congregation, there is no way that person could stay in office. When I have to conduct funerals of people that died with COVID-19, when I have to speak to someone that is inside of a hospital and I can't go see them, in front of the nursing home, and we can't go see them. So as pastors, so I had a lot of issue with what went on for the last 9 months. And so politically, he had to go. So politically, he had to go, not as a black person, not as an Afro-Caribbean person, but politically, we needed to make sure that everything that happened during these nine months, it was a wake-up call. It was a wake-up call for me. It was a wake-up call for my congregation. It was a wake-up call for every single pastor that I know. Churches closed, basically, because of politics. We played politics with what is going on. So that's my 2 cents, and then I'm going to leave my 2 cents, because if I were to continue talking about politics, I'll be here for the next half hour, 45 minutes talking about politics. I'm gonna close.
We'll have another show. So politics, what's the black agenda, y'all?
So I just want to add really quickly to retract. First of all, that I know of, the first civilization was in Ethiopia, motherland. So I'm assuming all of us are somehow, fruits of that civilization, if we're humans. I want to add as well, when we're filling out the form, there are only a few categories of which some of us fall under in terms of race. There's black, there is, I think, Spanish, Puerto Rican or non-Puerto Rican. There are a few categories. Now, then I'll mention on the immigration piece really quickly that when I first came to this country, there was a word alien, your alien number. Now, what's an alien? Something from outer space. So something from out of this world. So those are the disrespect that we as immigrants had to deal with. So unfortunately, I remember them changing it to your A number. So interestingly enough, in terms of black politics, I think one of the challenges is that politics was not ingrained in the school curriculum, from way back. So it's so important for us now, even more because of social media, because of media as a whole, educating us on a different level. So now children are now educated a little more on voting or being civically engaged, as well as young adults. And that's why we see the movement of the young people mustering up to come out and rallying around, voting. So it is so important to actually now acknowledge the black votes, as we've seen from Barack Obama's period, to now, which is being so much respected because the Black community is now coming out. Even here in my community in Brooklyn, 54% of the 190,000 people who live in this community are under the category of the Black race. So that's a strong population in our small circle here in Brooklyn, in District 46. That's the city council district. So much less the whole of Brooklyn, and then New York City, and then America. So the Black vote needs to be respected just like every other vote, which it was not, in my opinion, in the past. So that's my little take.
So we're heading out, but I want to give everybody that wants to a chance, to talk about this Black agenda or Black politics, because this was an earth-shattering, to me, political election, and Black women are getting their big ups. So our final parting thought about Black politics.
I can start. I think that we are at a time where, I think that we're at a time and space where there's really a need to rethink our concept of Black politics. I look at this election that just passed, the one before that. Traditionally, elected officials have seen Black politics as being about, and this is, of course, nothing about our faith leaders that are on this panel. But for so long, Black politics was about talking to Black churches. It was about policing or criminal justice, and then maybe jobs or civil rights issues. But really, as we all know, Black people face a wide range of issues that they care about. Black people congregate, yes, in the church, but in other places as well, in communities, in unions, and in other places. And, I think this sort of ties back to our last conversation around Black authenticity. When we think of Black politics and we let elected officials off the hook by allowing them to address us on their terms, we're really doing a disservice to our community. I think we're in a place where we need to show elected officials, Black people, yes, we care about policing and criminal justice, but we also care about healthcare and jobs, and we want to be in unions, and we need better schools, all of the issues, and we care about the environment, all of the issues that, that I know the Black Institute works on and are touched on in the book, but also all of the issues that, that we face day to day. Those are my thoughts on Black politics. I think we just really need to be in a place where we start to realign and, really think of the ways in which we're engaging elected officials on our issues.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm sick of politics. My heart has been broken so many times, and I think, quite frankly, it is the politicians of color, the Black politicians, that have disappointed me the most. As you all know, next year in 2021 here in the city, we're going to have almost 500 people running. And some people are just going to run just on race. I had a call from a New York Times reporter today. Let me talk to you about so-and-so, the Black, running for mayor or city council or controller. I'm sick of it. I really am. It's just my opinion that sometimes Black politicians get elected, and once they get in office, it's just like, I'm gravy.
So, Bertha.
Oh man, Bertha,
yeah.
I'm so challenged by. Sorry, Bertha, I'm so challenged by that statement. I mean, I think that politicians in general, or politics in general, is a popularity contest. It's not a contest on governance. It's not a contest on service. And so the same issues that plague Black politicians plague white politicians. And so I'm challenged by the idea that that you have a bigger problem with Black politicians. I think that you have more expectation, and that is that may be the root of your disappointment, because you have more expectation, because you would believe that once they pass this popularity contest, they're going to do the thing that's not popular. But I think that that's counterintuitive, right? The way that you get into office is you become popular. You win a popular vote for local elections. The way that you stay in office, the way that you stay employed, is you stay popular. If you get in there and you disrupt and you do things that are not popular, even if they are good governance, even if they are in good service, right, you will not be reelected. We saw that with Jimmy Carter, right? And so I think that the like what I've seen, what I've witnessed through this political cycle is I've witnessed that Black people have become much more politically astute. We've seen that Black women specifically saved this republic, right, from Donald Trump. Specifically, you know, Abrams and many others who made sure that even though redistricting and gerrymandering was happening, right, that the vote was getting out and that people were engaged. And it wasn't like, oh, we're voting for Joe Biden. We're voting even for Kamala Harris. We're voting for ourselves. We know that there's a despot in that position and he's doing things that is bad for us. And so we're going to vote based upon our interests. And I think I did see that. And so I'm encouraged by the continued growth of the Black electorate. There is still so much work to be done in our communities, for our communities, by our communities. But I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to challenge you publicly, and I'm going to challenge you privately about Black politicians, because they are just politicians.
Put up your dukes. I'll meet the challenge.
So can I defend her for a second? Having worked for government for over 28 years, having worked for an elected official, so there is this delicate balance. This delicate balance of one, running for office, running for office, one, getting elected. Then, in order for you to maintain your elected official position, you always have to try to find a way to balance your elected office in terms of constituent services. What are you providing to the constituents? And there are services that you cannot provide to your constituents if you are not negotiating constantly with your other colleagues in the city council, in the legislature. If you cannot negotiate with them, then there are certain services that you cannot provide. So one of the things that I've realized, and I understand where Bertha's coming from, because having worked with her since 1998 to get elected officials elected, and then once you get them elected into an office, suddenly the person that you got elected into an elected office, that person, when they start balancing their need to get reelected, or their need to provide services, or their need to put their name on certain bills, they all of a sudden they will forget the person that got them to the table. So when they start balancing those three things, they forget, and it's unfortunate that that's the way politics works. It doesn't work like that only for African American politicians, but it works like that for all politicians. And some of them, they go into office with good intentions. They go into office to really change the system. But then after a while, once they start to realize that in order for them to start to stay inside the system, to pay their bills, then they start to compromise. They compromise their values. They compromise what it was that they went in for, and they no longer look at the constituent. They look at the special interests that's keeping them in. They look at the negotiations that they are doing with their colleagues in order to maintain a paycheck, in order to maintain their standard way of life. Take them out of politics, they no longer have a paycheck. They no longer are able to feed their families. So I understand the delicate balance of both sides.
So,
If I may, Bertha, I think it's important for us as Black people in this country to understand our political power. Blacks were the major populations of cities that determined the outcome of this election. You had Detroit, which was 70% Black, Atlanta, 62% Black, Philadelphia, 42% Black, Milwaukee, 39% Black. I mean, we've got to understand that in a deeply divided white America, we become the swing vote. Politics is power. Who has it and who's benefiting from it? We should, although we're not monolithic, craft a Black agenda. We should address those issues that have been keeping back our community for centuries, like racialized policing system, racialized criminal justice system, racialized healthcare system, which we've seen its deficiencies and inadequacies when it comes to Black and brown people, inequities in education, inequities in economic opportunity. I mean, we have a solid basic agenda that we should hold our politicians accountable for, our government accountable for. We need to realize our social and political power.
Well, I'm glad you said that now we are the swing voters, because in politics, the swing voter, the swing states were always referring, everybody knew, to white people. But now we are the swing. And I think that you're right, Pastor. We have to recognize our power. I know it's a delicate balance, but you know what? Sometimes something got to tip toward us. People are tiptoeing around reparations because politically they don't want to talk about it. But I want to just say, I just want to thank you all for being my inaugural panel. Hopefully in this series, because we are going to continue these race conversations, we'll be able to come back together and be in the same room, you know, so we can feel each other's energy. But you guys have made this good. You've been raw and you've been real. You've been talking about race, and you guys were the first. And again, everybody gets a copy, a hardback, signed copy of All Races, All Faces. Thank you all so much, and stay Black. Peace. So I think